On a crowded street in Manila, a small boy with a cracked guitar stood beneath a flickering lamppost, singing with a voice that felt far too big for his trembling frame. Strangers slowed their steps, drawn by the tremor of pain and hope mixed inside each note. What they didn't know was that every song was a prayer for his mother's life. Elias had never known a life of comfort. But he did know joy once before, the coughing fits, before the hospital rooms, before the weight of decisions no 13-year-old should make. Back then, his mother's laughter filled their tiny apartment in Manila like music. She'd sing while preparing rice, tapping pots like drums, and Elias would mimic her with a wooden spoon as his imaginary microphone. But life shifted quietly, the way storms do, first with tired eyes, then with breathless steps, and finally, the trembling hands that couldn't lift the spoon anymore. When the diagnosis came, Elias didn't understand the long words the doctor used. He only understood the tremor in his mother's voice and the silence that followed. Treatment would be expensive, very expensive, and when his mother could no longer work at the textile shop, the tiny roof over their heads felt heavier than a mountain. Elias' father had left years earlier, swallowed by a promise to find better work that never returned. Neighbors whispered, saying it was arthritis, or pneumonia, or something worse. But labels didn't matter. To Elias what mattered was that his mother was fading, and he needed to do something. While other kids rushed home from school with backpacks bouncing and ice cream melting down their wrists, Elias rushed home for different reasons. The faster he got there, the more time he had to check on his mother, make warm soup, fan her during fevers, and hum songs to calm her. But when the fevers became more frequent, and the medicine bottles emptied faster than coins gathered, reality clawed at him. One evening, with his mother asleep and breathing unevenly, Elias pulled out an old guitar from under the bed. Its wood was scratched, its strings rusty, and its sound slightly off-key, but it had been his mother's once. She taught him 3 chords before her strength began to slip away. That night, he tuned it by ear and practiced until his fingers burned, not for dreams of fame, but for survival. By morning, he made a decision. He would sing, not because he believed it would fix everything, but because it was the only thing he had left that might. After school, he walked to the crowded street corner near the market where jeepneys rattled by. Vendors shouted prices, and people rushed through life too fast to notice a boy with a guitar. He laid his mother's scarf on the ground as a makeshift basket and began to sing. His voice was shaky, but there was a raw tenderness inside it, like someone trying to hold back the ocean with cupped hands. At first, no one stopped. A few glanced, some ignored, and many brushed past. But Elias didn't give up. He kept singing as the sun dipped lower and lights flickered on, giving the street a warm, tired glow. Coins eventually clinked into the scarf, some out of sympathy, some out of admiration, and some simply because people sensed there was a real story hidden between each note. Every peso counted, every coin meant a little more medicine, another consultation, another day. And that was how Elias' routine began. School, home, street, song, hope. Because when the world gives you nothing, you learn to build with whatever you have left, even if it's just a guitar, a cracked voice, and a mother worth fighting for. The street became Ilya's second home. Some days were filled with generous smiles and warm blessings from strangers. Other days were heavy, and the only sound that fell into his mother's scarf was the lonely breath of passing traffic. But to Elias, every day was a battle worth fighting. Then one afternoon, hot, sticky, and loud, the market was busier than usual. Vendors argued over prices, children chased each other barefoot across the pavement, and jeepneys groaned through the street like tired dinosaurs. Elias stood at his usual spot, tuning his guitar with practiced fingers. His mother's scarf lay neatly on the concrete, edges weighed down by tiny stones to keep it from blowing away. When he finally began to sing, his voice cut through the chaos like light through cracked curtains. It wasn't perfect, not polished or trained, but it had a trembling sincerity that made listeners feel as though each lyric carried the weight of a secret. A few people stopped, as they always did. But it was one particular listener who changed everything. She was a modest tourist from Chicago. backpack straps hanging loose and camera in hand. She had been wandering for photos of real Manila, but nothing prepared her for Elias's voice. She didn't speak Tagalog, but she didn't need to. Emotion has a language of its own. She slowed, stood still, and watched the boy sing as if the entire market had suddenly faded away. When he finished his song, a small ripple of applause came from the nearby crowd. Elias bowed shyly and offered a soft salamat po as coins clinked into the scarf. The tourist hesitated, then approached with a gentle smile. "You're amazing," she said slowly, unsure if he understood. Elias blinked, half flustered, half grateful. "Thank you, Po," he replied softly. She recorded his next performance on her phone not to exploit, but because something about this scene felt important. She posted the video online with a simple caption: "This boy is singing on the streets to help his sick mom. The world needs to hear him." What happened next was beyond anything Elias could imagine. Overnight, the clip spread across platforms, first among travel bloggers, then music lovers, and then, somehow, everywhere. People shared it not just because of the song, but because of the sincerity etched into every frame: the cracked guitar, the determined eyes, the scarf acting as a donation basket, and the quiet strength of a child refusing to give up. Comments exploded. "His voice is breaking my heart. Someone get this kid on a stage. Where can we help? This boy deserves the world." Within days, the video reached millions, reposted by celebrities, stitched by influencers, translated into subtitles by strangers who cared. Donations began to flow for his mother's treatment, and messages from journalists and talent scouts crowded the inbox of the tourist who filmed him. And then, like a scene out of a dream, an email arrived with a subject line that made her gasp: "Invitation, America's Got Talent audition, urgent." She stared at the screen, stunned, and realized she needed to find Elias. For him, it was just another evening of singing under a flickering streetlight. For the world, it was the beginning of something extraordinary. Because sometimes, fate doesn't knock, it uploads, it shares, and it goes viral. And just like that, Elias' voice was no longer confined to a street corner in Manila. It was echoing across the globe. For Elias, the journey from a Manila street corner to the backstage of America's Got Talent felt unreal. Like stepping through a doorway into a world that looked too shiny to touch. The flight alone was a blur of airplane windows, kind smiles from volunteers, and moments where he pressed his forehead against the glass to watch clouds drift past, imagining how excited his mother would be if she could see the same view. When they arrived in Los Angeles, the city felt louder than Manila, but in a different way. Street markets and jeepneys, more towering billboards, honking cars, and faces from every corner of the world. The volunteers who accompanied him pointed out landmarks, but Elias barely heard a word. His mind was somewhere between worry and wonder, bouncing between the thought of his mother in her hospital bed and the massive audition stage he'd seen only on television. Backstage at AGT was a world of organized chaos: contestants pacing nervously, vocalists warming up, dancers stretching, magicians rehearsing with smoke and mirrors. Elias clutched his guitar as if it were a life vest. His hands kept sliding off the polished neck because they were slick with sweat. He had never performed in front of more than a few strangers at a bus stop. And now he stood behind a curtain that led to one of the biggest stages on the planet. "Name?" a staff member asked. "Elias," he whispered. "Take a deep breath. You're going to do great." But Elias wasn't sure, because no one backstage knew that he wasn't here chasing fame. He was chasing time for his mother. Time for more treatments. Time to make her smile again. When the stagehand finally gestured for him to step forward, his legs felt hollowed. The curtains parted, and suddenly everything was light. So much light that he had to blink to keep his eyes from watering. The audience stretched out like an ocean of faces, cameras, and sparkles. The judges sat behind their desk, iconic and intimidating. Heidi, smiling warmly, Howie leaning forward, Sophia curious, and Simon expression unreadable. They waited for him to speak. "What's your name?" Simon asked. "Elias," he managed. "And why are you here today?" Howie followed. Elias swallowed hard, fingers tightening around his guitar. He didn't want pity, he wanted purpose. So he answered simply, voice trembling, "I want to sing for my mum." The audience shifted, some leaning forward, some holding their breath. Without waiting for more questions, he positioned his guitar, closed his eyes, and remembered something important. His mother used to say, "Don't sing to impressing, to heal." So he began softly, at first, like a secret he wasn't sure he should share, but then the melody grew, warm and aching, filling the auditorium with a gentleness that contrasted the bright, glittering space. His voice cracked in places, not from inexperience, but from weight. Real weight. The kind you don't learn in music school. As he sang, the audience quieted. Phones lowered. Conversations stopped. Even the judges seemed to forget they were judging a show. For those few minutes, the giant stage didn't feel so giant, it felt intimate. Like a small corner under a street lamp in Manila. When Elias hit the final note, his voice frayed into a whisper, fragile, honest, and trembling. Then silence swallowed the room. A silence that meant everyone had felt it. A silence that meant something big was about to happen. For a heartbeat, the entire auditorium felt frozen in time. Elias stood center stage, head lowered, guitar hanging loosely from his hands as if he'd poured out every last bit of strength he had. He wasn't sure if he'd been good enough. He wasn't sure if the crack in his voice near the bridge ruined everything. But in that quiet stillness, he knew one thing he had sung with every ounce of love inside him. Then came the sound. First, a single clap, sharp, echoing from somewhere near the front. Then another. Then dozens more. And within seconds, a tidal wave of applause crashed over the room. The audience rose to their feet, cheering so loudly that Elias' eyes widened in disbelief. He'd never heard applause like that, not on the street corner, not anywhere. It felt unreal, like a dream too big for his chest to hold. Howie Mandel leaned forward, shaking his head with a sort of stunned admiration. "Elias, that wasn't just singing," he said, voice amplified through the massive speakers. "That was storytelling. That was heart." Heidi Klum pressed her hand to her chest. "I felt every word," she said softly. "Your voice may not be the strongest technically, but emotionally, it's powerful." Sofia Vergara nodded vigorously. "You captured us," she added. "I think your mother would be proud of you." Elias swallowed hard. His mother? The reason he was here. He imagined her watching from a hospital bed back in Manila, eyes wet, smile fragile. He wondered if she could feel him through the screen. Then Simon Cowell leaned forward, hands clasped, eyes sharp with the kind of attention that made contestants either soar or crumble. The audience quieted instantly, sensing that something important was coming. "Elias," Simon began slowly, "I've judged this show for a very long time." He paused, letting the weight settle. "And every once in a while, someone walks onto this stage and reminds us what this show is really about." Elias' fingers trembled around the neck of his guitar. "You didn't come here to impress us. You came here because you love someone," Simon continued. "And we could all feel that. That last note. The crack in your voice. That wasn't a mistake. That was honesty." The crowd murmured in agreement. "And I think," Simon said, voice growing stronger, "that the world needs to hear more of that." In one swift motion, Simon stood up and slammed his hand down. The button lit up, bright and blinding. The golden buzzer. A roar exploded through the auditorium as golden confetti burst from the ceiling, cascading down in glittering waves. Elias gasped, staring upward as gold pieces flooded around him like a shimmering storm. His knees buckled, overwhelmed, and for a second he looked like a little boy again, not a performer. Not a contender, just a child who'd carried too much for too long. Simon walked up onto the stage, breaking every bit of his usual stoicism. He placed a hand on Elias' shoulder and leaned in so the boy could hear him over the chaos. "That was for your mum," Simon whispered. "Go help her." Elias' chest caved, and he began to cry, not quietly, not politely, but freely. The way a child cries when the world finally offers relief instead of burden. He looked out into the audience, confetti sticking to his tear-stained cheeks, and whispered through trembling lips, "For you, Mama." Backstage, producers scrambled. Judges wiped their eyes. Strangers recorded on their phones, knowing they had just witnessed a moment that would travel far beyond the walls of the theater. Because the golden buzzer wasn't just a celebration, it was a lifeline. And for Elias, it was the closest thing to a miracle he had ever seen. The days that followed Elias' golden buzzer performance moved faster than his heart could keep up with. The video of his audition exploded online, flooding social media feeds, news broadcasts, and reaction channels across the world. Clips of a tiny boy with a cracked guitar crying under a shower of golden confetti were shared with captions like, "This is why kindness matters," and a reminder of what love can do. But for Elias, the most important screen wasn't on national television, it was the small tablet in his mother's hospital room back in Manila. Nurses gathered around her bed as the replay aired, tissues in hand, cheering as Simon hit the buzzer and golden light filled the stage. Her frail hands trembled as she lifted the device closer, eyes welling with tears that sparkled as brightly as the confetti. "That's my son," she whispered, voice thin but full of pride. "That's my Elias." Within days, an outpouring of love began. Foundations reached out, doctors volunteered their services, strangers donated to her medical care, and local news stations covered the story non-stop. One specialist even flew in from abroad, insisting he didn't want to watch another replay of the performance without doing something to help. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, at first Elias' mother began to heal. Her breaths grew less labored, her color returned, and she began to sit upright for longer periods. The tubes and machines that once defined her days became fewer and fewer, until finally, she was able to go home when Elias returned to Manila between a GT rounds. He walked into their tiny apartment, expecting to see the quiet stillness he had left behind. Instead, he found warm light pots simmering on the stove, and his mother no longer in bed standing weakly, but smiling near the doorway. Elias froze, guitar strap still slung over his shoulder. "Mama," he whispered. She nodded, tears rolling freely. "You did it." He ran into her arms, burying his face into her shoulder as her hands stroked his hair. For the first time in years, the apartment echoed with her laughter, not the bright, ringing laughter from before she got sick, but a softer, grateful version, tinged with survival. As the season progressed, Elias kept performing not because he needed votes or validation, but because he discovered something powerful. His voice could help others. Messages poured in from kids in Brazil, mothers in Nigeria, veterans in the US, and students in Europe. They wrote about struggle, love, and resilience. They called him the boy who sings for hope. And Elias embraced that role. After the show, he began performing for charity events and hospital fundraisers. He didn't chase fame, he chased purpose. People didn't listen to Elias because he was perfect. They listened because he made them feel something real. He reminded them that even when life presses hardest, love pushes back harder. One evening, months later, during a performance at a children's hospital, Elias leaned into the mic and said something that would become his signature. "Miracles don't always fall from the sky. Sometimes, they come from strangers, kindness, and the courage to keep going." Parents cried. Nurses paused. Kids smiled through their pain, because they knew it was true. And as Elias played the first chord of his song, standing under soft stage lights with his mother watching from the front row, he realized that his journey wasn't about talent shows or fame, it was about healing, humanity, and the way one act of compassion can ripple across the world.